What if everything you thought you knew about the world was wrong? What if the real causes behind crime, success, corruption, and parenting were completely different from what society believes? In a world filled with assumptions, data can reveal some shocking truths. Today, we're diving deep into Freakonomics, the groundbreaking book that dares to expose the hidden side of everything. Part 1. The hidden side of everything. In the early 1990s, America was gripped by fear. Nightly news reports painted a picture of chaos. Gunfire echoing through cities, carjackings on the rise, drug violence tearing neighborhoods apart. Experts warned that a terrifying new breed of criminal, the so-called super predator, was about to plunge the nation into darkness. These were young, ruthless, remorseless teenagers armed with guns and anger. Politicians and criminologists predicted that the crime rate would explode. Even President Bill Clinton cautioned that if drastic action wasn't taken, America would soon be overwhelmed. And then something astonishing happened. Instead of rising, crime began to fall. It didn't just dip slightly, it plummeted. Murder rates, assaults, robberies, all began to decline year after year in city after city. It was one of the most dramatic reversals in modern American history. The experts who had been so sure of their predictions were suddenly scrambling for answers. Their explanations sounded reasonable. They credited a booming economy, better policing, gun control laws, or community programs. These explanations comforted the public. They implied that society had taken charge of its destiny and fixed a terrible problem through human effort and good policy. But Levitt and Dubner discovered that these explanations didn't hold up to scrutiny. When they dug deeper into the data, they found a single, surprising cause that no one dared to discuss: legalized abortion. Decades earlier, in 1973, the Supreme Court case Roe v. Wade had legalized abortion across the United States. This meant that many unwanted pregnancies, those most likely to occur among poor, uneducated, and unsupported women, were now preventable. As Levitt discovered, children born into adverse environments are statistically far more likely to become criminals later in life. 20 years after Roe v. Wade, the generation of children who might have grown up in these circumstances simply wasn't there. The pool of potential criminals had quietly, invisibly shrunk. It was a controversial and uncomfortable conclusion, but the data was clear. The book's first revelation set the tone for everything that followed. That beneath every conventional explanation lies a deeper, often hidden truth. Freakonomics is about finding those truths, about asking questions others are too afraid or too blind to ask. Part 2. What do school teachers and sumo wrestlers have in common? To understand human behavior, Levitt argues, you have to understand incentives. They're the cornerstone of all decision-making, the invisible strings that pull people toward or away from action. Every choice we make is shaped by three kinds of incentives: economic, social, and moral. Consider a simple story from Israel. A daycare center had a recurring problem. Parents often arrived late to pick up their children, forcing teachers to stay late. The administrators decided to impose a small fine. Parents who arrived more than 10 minutes late would pay $3. It sounded logical: punish lateness, and parents would show up on time. But the results were the opposite. Once the fine was introduced, lateness doubled. Why? Because the fine turned a moral obligation into a transaction. Before, parents felt guilty about keeping teachers waiting. Now, they were simply paying for extra babysitting time. The fine had replaced moral incentives with economic ones, and it failed. This small story reveals something profound about human nature. People respond to incentives, but not always in predictable ways. Sometimes, when we think we're solving a problem, we're actually making it worse. Levitt then applies this idea to a very different setting: the Chicago public school system. In the 1990s, schools began using high-stakes testing to measure performance. Students, teachers, and schools were all judged by these scores. Good results brought rewards. Bad results brought punishment or even closure. The logic was simple: incentivize improvement, and everyone will work harder. But incentives can also tempt people to cheat. Levitt analyzed hundreds of thousands of student test sheets using statistical algorithms. What he found was shocking. Roughly 5% of classrooms showed patterns too unusual to be random. Teachers were erasing wrong answers and filling in correct ones to boost scores. They weren't helping their students learn. They were protecting themselves from punishment. When Chicago retested some of these classrooms under strict supervision, the scores collapsed. The pattern was unmistakable. Where incentives were distorted, cheating followed. And this wasn't unique to schools. Levitt looked to Japan, where sumo wrestling, a sacred national sport built on honor, was found to have its own corruption. Data revealed that wrestlers with similar records often colluded. If one wrestler needed a win to maintain his rank, his opponent would deliberately lose, expecting the favor to be returned later. The data told the story. When those same pairs fought again, the outcomes flipped more often than chance would allow. The conclusion was unsettling but powerful. Whether in classrooms or in sacred sports, people cheat when incentives make cheating more rewarding than honesty. The desire for success, reputation, or survival often outweighs morality. Part 3. How is the Ku Klux Klan like a group of real estate agents? At first glance, it's an absurd comparison, a racist secret society and a group of real estate professionals. But Levitt's genius lies in seeing the invisible threads that connect seemingly unrelated things. Both the Ku Klux Klan and real estate agents rely on one key asset: information asymmetry, when one side knows more than the other and uses that knowledge for advantage. During the 1940s, activist Stetson Kennedy infiltrated the Ku Klux Klan. The Klan thrived on fear and secrecy. Their power came from the illusion of mystery, secret codes, rituals, and a sense of omnipotence. But when Kennedy began broadcasting those secrets on a popular radio show, the Klan's power evaporated overnight. Without its veil of secrecy, the organization lost control. The weapon of information, once exposed, became useless. Levitt draws a parallel with modern experts, particularly real estate agents. When you hire an agent to sell your home, you trust that they'll get you the best deal. But incentives reveal another story. Agents earn only a small percentage of the sale, typically around 1.5% after commissions are split. For a $300,000 house, that's just $4,500 in their pocket. Holding out for a few extra weeks to get you $10,000 more only adds about $150 to their profit. Hardly worth the effort. So, agents often push clients to accept the first reasonable offer instead of waiting for a better one. But when selling their own homes, agents behave differently. Levitt analyzed thousands of property sales and found that agents kept their own homes on the market longer and sold them for higher prices. The data was clear. When the incentive shifts, so does behavior. Just like the Klan used secret information to maintain power, agents use insider knowledge of the market to influence your choices, often in ways that serve them more than you. Levitt's message is simple but profound. Transparency changes everything. The more information becomes public, the less power experts have to manipulate it. Part 4. Why do drug dealers still live with their moms? If movies and music videos were to be believed, drug dealers live lives of luxury, fast cars, gold chains, and piles of cash. But when Levitt teamed up with sociologist Sudhir Venkatesh to study an actual Chicago crack gang, they found a far grimmer reality. Through meticulous record-keeping by the gang's accountant, Levitt gained access to financial ledgers that revealed exactly how the drug operation worked. The structure resembled a corporate pyramid. At the top was the boss, earning hundreds of thousands a year. Beneath him were a few high-ranking lieutenants. And below them, hundreds of street-level dealers, the ones risking their lives daily, earning less than minimum wage. Most of these young men lived with their mothers because they couldn't afford to live on their own. They stayed in the game not because of wealth, but because of hope, the dream of climbing the ladder, of one day becoming the boss. It was the same incentive structure that drives ambitious workers in any industry, only with far deadlier consequences. The data also revealed the brutal cost of this dream. The death rate for street-level dealers was astronomical, higher than for soldiers in wartime. Yet the allure of power and respect kept drawing new recruits in. Levitt's analysis stripped away the glamour and revealed the economics of desperation. Drug dealing, he showed, wasn't chaos. It was organized capitalism at its most ruthless. The promise of riches was real for a few, but for most, it was an illusion sustained by incentives, hierarchy, and social pressure. It was once again the hidden logic of human behavior. People chasing rewards that statistics said they'd likely never reach. Part 5. Where have all the criminals gone? In the 1990s, America experienced one of the most dramatic social changes in modern history. Violent crime, which had terrorized the nation for decades, began to fall, and not just a little. It plummeted. Murder rates were cut in half, cities once overrun by gangs began to stabilize, and for the first time in years, Americans felt safe walking the streets again. Politicians, police chiefs, and pundits scrambled to take credit. Some pointed to the booming economy, claiming prosperity reduced desperation. Others praised stricter gun laws, longer prison sentences, and the rise of community policing. But Stephen Levitt wasn't convinced. When he analyzed the data, he found that while these factors contributed a little, none of them could fully explain the scale or timing of the decline. So what had happened? Levitt traced the answer back to 1973, the year of the Supreme Court's landmark decision in Roe v. Wade. Legalized abortion, he argued, had quietly reshaped the demographic landscape of America. For the first time, millions of women who weren't ready to raise children, often poor, single, or very young, had the choice not to give birth. 2 decades later, the generation of children who would have been most at risk for growing up in unstable, violent environments simply wasn't there. The data told a stark story. The states that legalized abortion early saw their crime rates drop earliest and most sharply. It wasn't a moral argument. It was a statistical one. Crime declined not because society had reformed, but because fewer children were born into the kind of desperate circumstances that tend to breed criminal behavior. The conclusion was controversial and unsettling. It forced readers to confront uncomfortable truths about cause and effect, morality and policy. Yet Levitt's evidence was robust. Freakonomics wasn't trying to make a political point. It was trying to make a factual one. It showed how deeply intertwined human behavior is with the incentives and options society creates, even when the connection is invisible. Part 6. What makes a perfect parent? Every parent wants to believe that they hold the secret formula to raising successful, intelligent, and happy children. Parenting books, talk shows, and psychologists constantly insist that with the right techniques, you can shape your child's destiny. But what if the truth is far more complicated or simpler? Stephen Levitt and Stephen Dubner examined a massive trove of data from a long-term study that tracked thousands of children from birth through their school years. It recorded not only their test scores, but also every conceivable detail about their family lives, their parents' education, income, habits, and even how often they read bedtime stories. The Economist wanted to answer one fundamental question: what truly makes a difference in a child's success? The findings overturned decades of conventional wisdom. Many of the things parents worry about, how often they read to their kids, whether they send them to private school, or if they allow them to watch television, had surprisingly little measurable effect on a child's future performance. Instead, what mattered most wasn't what parents did, but who parents were. A child born to educated, stable, middle-class parents already had a head start long before they entered preschool. Parents with higher education levels tended to value learning, create calm and organized homes, and naturally pass on those values. A parent's own intelligence, income, and lifestyle predicted outcomes better than any specific parenting strategy. For example, parents who kept a house filled with books didn't necessarily raise successful children because the books themselves were magical. It was because those homes usually belonged to educated, curious adults who valued learning. It wasn't the action of reading to a child every night that mattered as much as the environment in which that reading took place. Levitt and Dubner's message wasn't to discourage effort, but to liberate parents from unnecessary guilt and anxiety. The perfect parent doesn't micromanage every detail of a child's life. Instead, they create a stable, loving atmosphere and model the values they hope their children will adopt. Parenting, the data revealed, is far more about identity than strategy. Part 7. Perfect Parenting, Part 2, or would a ROSHANDA by any other name smell as sweet? Names carry power, or so society believes. We often think that a person's name can shape their destiny, signaling their background, intelligence, or even potential success. But can something as simple as what you're called really determine the course of your life? Levitt and Dubner explored this question using millions of birth records from California, tracking the long-term outcomes of children across different socioeconomic groups. The patterns they uncovered were striking. Names often served as mirrors reflecting cultural trends, class distinctions, and aspirations. They discovered that names travel through society in waves. A name that begins among the wealthy and well-educated, say, Madison or Chloe, often becomes popular among lower-income families a few years later. But by the time it spreads, the elite have already moved on to new names. This cycle repeats endlessly, making names an indicator of class mobility rather than a cause of it. Take the example of distinctively African-American names like ROSHANDA or Deshawn. Some people assumed these names might limit job prospects due to racial bias. However, the data showed that while employers did sometimes discriminate, the real issue wasn't the name itself, but the socioeconomic conditions surrounding it. A child named ROSHANDA didn't have fewer opportunities because of her name. She had fewer opportunities because of the environment into which she was born. Levitt concluded that names are outcomes, not origins. They reveal the circumstances of a family, their culture, income, aspirations, but they do not dictate destiny. A child's future depends far more on the family's stability, education, and resources than on whether their name sounds upper class or unconventional. The myth that a name determines fate is another case of society confusing correlation with causation. In the end, Levitt and Dubner argued that the true influence of parenting lies not in the superficial details, the name, the school, or the extracurriculars, but in the foundation of security, curiosity, and opportunity that parents create. Epilogue: 2 Paths to Harvard. To bring their ideas full circle, Levitt and Dubner closed Freakonomics with a story of 2 boys from Chicago, both named Robert, both growing up in the same city, and both destined for Harvard. But their paths could not have been more different. One, Robert, was raised in a comfortable, educated family. His parents valued reading, conversation, and curiosity. They had the means to provide a safe home and good schools. His journey to Harvard seemed almost inevitable, the natural outcome of privilege and preparation. The other, Robert's life was defined by struggle. He grew up in a poor neighborhood, surrounded by crime and instability. His family had little money, and few believed he would ever escape his circumstances. Yet, through determination, intelligence, and grit, he beat the odds. Against all predictions, he too made it to Harvard. The 2 Roberts embodied the paradox of Freakonomics. Data can explain trends, probabilities, and incentives, but it can never fully predict individual destiny. People are shaped by forces both visible and hidden, yet every person carries the potential to defy expectation. Levitt and Dubner's closing message is one of humility and curiosity. The world is not simple, and the causes behind success or failure are rarely obvious. What seems like common sense is often wrong, and what looks insignificant can have enormous consequences. If we truly wish to understand the world, we must look beyond appearances, question assumptions, and follow the trail of evidence wherever it leads. In the end, Freakonomics isn't just about economics or data. It's about human nature, the incentives, choices, and contradictions that define us all. It reminds us that the world is full of hidden patterns waiting to be discovered, if only we have the courage to look beneath the surface. Freakonomics teaches us one timeless lesson. The truth is rarely what it seems. Whether it's crime, parenting, education, or economics, hidden forces shape the world. And if you dare to look beyond the obvious, You might just uncover the secret logic behind human behavior.